Hi, and welcome back to Biblical Theology, Exegesis, and Hermeneutics, where meaning is always context driven. I'm your host, John Strazicich. Okay, now coming once again to the Aleppo Codex, as our custom has been, we'll begin reading here at 8:1. Ko hir'ani Adonai Elohim v'hinei keluv kayetz vayomer ma'ata ro'e Amos va'omar keluv kayetz vayomer Adonai Elai ba haketz el ami Yisrael lo osif od avor lo v'helilu shirot heichal bayom hahu ne'um Adonai Elohim Rav hapeger bekol makom hishlik has. Okay, then coming to our translation, so the text would say, thus the Lord Yahweh caused me to see, and behold, a basket of summer fruit. And he said, what do you see, Amos? And I said, a basket of summer fruit. And Yahweh said to me, the end has come to my people Israel. I shall no longer pass by him. And the songs of the temple shall be howlings in that day, declaration of Yahweh. There shall be many corpses in every place, and then this hishlik in many places. They are cast in many places. I guess since it's a third person singular, it could be used impersonally as a passive, but we could understand this still as Yahweh as the subject. So it would be there are many corpses he has cast in every place. And then finally, hush or silence. Okay, that's our translation. Okay, so we're going to let Douglas Stewart set the table for us for this particular unit. And he had some exceptionally good things here to say regarding our text. The recognition that 8:4-14 is a unity depends especially on the observation that prophetic judgment oracles do not normally exist apart from indictments. That is, God rarely announces punishment for covenant breaking without providing some sort of evidence or reminder of how the covenant has been broken. Prophetic restoration promises are not predicated upon Israel's good behavior, but judgment oracles are nearly always predicated upon Israel's bad behavior. From the present passage, verses 9 and 10, 11 to 12, and 13 to 14 are often isolated as three distinct oracles of doom and appended to verses 4 to 8 because of their similar subject matter. Now that's a very, very important observation, and this is essential to understand properly the context. And I will provide a full structural analysis of the unit, but this particular point, just if you just stop right there. Much of what he goes to say is just going to reinforce this point. And I think this is important. And I'll let you read the rest of this. But especially, as you're preparing, your sermons or your teaching, of this passage yourself, it's very important for you to understand the structure of a passage and all of its elements. And so he provides some of this here, and I thought it was very good out of all the commentaries that I have. And I thought he really kind of put this together in a very thoughtful way. Okay, so coming back to this familiar slide here, we are dealing here, with chapter 8. This becomes point C, the fourth vision. That's because the third and fourth vision are bound together as Amos's non-contested visionary accounts. And we saw last time that it did include a confrontation here, this third-person perspective biographical material that was inserted into Amos's autobiographical account. So we talked about that last time. So now we fall upon here the fourth vision, which deals with Yahweh's pun on Kayets and Kates, which deals with the Kayets is this keluv Kayets is a basket of summer fruits, and then he says Baha Kates El Ami Yisrael, the end has come for my people Israel. And so this is going to become this pun here. And then is, to these first four visions is then is appended this oracle here, just like it does down here with the fifth, after the fifth vision. We have another oracles of both judgment and salvation. But anyhow, so we're just concentrating here on the fourth vision and Amos's oracles of judgment concerning the end. So today, basically, we're going to look at all of chapter 8. But I just wanted you to see the somewhat more of the macro structure of what we're working through. Okay, then coming then to this slide, I had to put it, in such small print. You're going to have to try to blow it up here. But verses 1 to 3 here is point C, the fourth vision, Yahweh's wordplay on the end has come, and so that takes up this portion here, and I provided this structural analysis here, and then from 4 to 14. The oracles concerning the end, and here that covers all of 4 to 14. And I have 2 points. First of all, we have verses 4 to 6, where Amos lists 7 bases for Israel's judgment. And then point B here, then Amos lists 7 I will statements concerning Yahweh's judgment upon Israel. And then this is just so small here, it's even hard for me to see this here, but we'll work through this as we go through the text. But anyhow, I wanted to provide it all on one slide here, so that you may want to print this out or whatever, as you may need to. Okay. I'd like to present here Dr. Reed Lessing in his decent commentary here on Amos. And he says this of our passage here: a basket of summer fruit must have been familiar to Amos, who, along with working with livestock, earned part of his living in agriculture. There, remember, he said that he was a dresser of fig trees. So he was scratching them so as to induce their ripening process. And so he says here, Kayet's fruit could refer to fresh figs that were harvested in the summer during the months of August and September. Rhyming in 8:2 with Kayet's fruit is Kate's end, which in this context refers to the day of Yahweh, and he's referring here back to 5:18 to 20. Agrarian minds understand the connection between fruit and the end. The time of harvest invokes ideas of ripeness, decay, and finality. So as you know that when we come to the time of Sukkot, it's the end of the agricultural year. So then you understand that Kayet, summer fruits, and then end with, as he says, agrarian minds would understand the connection much more fully. Okay, then coming then to this slide, what we're going to see here, we're looking here at the visionary account here, his fourth vision. And I have the structural analysis here for us. And this is, again, Yahweh's, wordplay here, upon on Kayets and Kates. And the structure of the passage here is basically comes in three parts. We have the introductory visionary report, which is Kohir Ani Adonai Elohim v'hine kelu Kayetz. Thus, the Lord Yahweh caused me to see, and behold, a basket of summer fruit. And so this would take up the introductory visionary report. And then we have the dialogue here between Yahweh and Amos. And that occurs here in basically in 2a. So it's just real short. And, and he said, what do you see, Amos? And then his reply is, and I said, a basket of summer fruits. Okay. And then the third part here is the divine interpretation. So how are you going to then, work on Kayets and Kates, and so how is Yahweh going to spin this? Literally. So we have here at the very end of verse 2, 2b, we have the speech reporting formula, Vayomer Adonai Eli, and Yahweh said to me. And then in poetic discourse here, then comes the interpretation. And then he says here, the end has come to my people Israel. That's line A. And then line B is, I shall no longer pass by him. And you'll note here that this language here, lo osif od avor lo, this is repetitive from the third vision that we looked at last time. So, that's another reason why, these visionary accounts here are classed. We have the contested visionary accounts and then the non-contested visionary accounts. And so this belongs to the non-contested visionary accounts, and both of these statements here come in those accounts that we saw that last time. And then, okay, so he tells us the interpretation, the end has come. Okay, so this is, he's dealing basically with the eschatological end of Israel here, which would ultimately date to 722 BC. And then he gives us a depiction of what that end is going to look like, and he does so with two tristichs here. So that's very, very important. So this would make up a strophe, Yahweh's interpretation. But verse 3 in and of itself is then going to be the elucidation, or in a broad stroke, what this end, this hakates, is going to look like. And so he says here, the songs of the temple shall be howlings in that day, declares the Lord Yahweh. And then and he's going to then give a fuller definition in the last tristich. There shall be many corpses and he has cast it out in every place. Or you could say, there are many corpses cast out in every place. That's permissible. Most translations probably go with this impersonal passive here, for this hifil here of hishlik here, which it's fine. I like both. So, but understanding it from Yahweh's perspective, he is the active member here. That probably should be kept in mind. But even if you do translate it passively, it's just trying to make it better translation into English here, with this. And then all by itself, I just put silence. And you remember this goes straight back, to what we looked at previously. This is not the first time he has said silence in a religious context here. Because remember that it was the illustration of the siege of Samaria. I think it was chapter 6 that we saw this in, and there was the dialogue of the uncle with some other person who was a part of the rescue team. Is there any other bodies left? And he said no. And then he said hush, for it's not permissible to cause the name of Yahweh to be mentioned, because you mention Yahweh's name, and death may come to you. That's what that means there, and so here hush here has a stilling effect that silence needs to take place, because death, we're talking about here the death of northern Israel. So this is this is really heavy duty, text that he gives us here, just in a few words here. Basically, essentially in verse 3, he basically tells us how it's all going to end. Okay, then coming here, we're coming then to the oracles concerning the end, verses 4 to 14. And we are going to look at point A here, which covers verses 4 to 6. And Amos lists basically 7 bases for Israel's judgment. And we could see the bases for these, for the judgment. They come here primarily, mostly in with these infinitives of purpose. And first of all, we have vilash beat here. We have to bring the poor of the land to bring them to an end. It's a pun on Sabbath here, because he's about to go into speech about the Shabbat and also the new moon, Chodesh here. So I think I'm following here the suggestion here of Douglas Stewart here, and he had mentioned here probably the choice for this particular verb, to cease. Here it is done as a pun, and because he just got done punning the between Kayetz and Kate, so he's just continuing some of this language here. You have to be a little bit more nuanced in reading this, but I can see his point here, and I've adopted his understanding of the text. So we have here, hear this, those who trample upon the needy, and this is so as to cause the poor of the land to cease. So there's our first these are, Amos is listing 7 bases for Israel's judgment. Well, here's the first, okay? Those who trample on the needy in order to, with the purpose that, they're going to exterminate the poor of the land. And then the next one here is lehaktin here, and that is to, to make small the ephah, and then here to hagdil, to make great the shekel, and then here, and then avet, and then to, pervert the scales of justice. And then we have here, so as to purchase the poor with silver, and to purchase the needy for a pair of sandals. So to purchase here, it does double duty on this last tri-stick here, and to purchase the needy with a pair of sandals. So to purchase the poor with silver, and to purchase the needy with a pair of sandals, and then lastly here, that we may and that we may sell the refuse of grain. So these are seven items here, and these are to bring an end to the poor of the earth, to make small the ephah, to make great the shekel, and to pervert the scales of deceit. So that makes 4. And then we have here to purchase the poor with silver, and then to purchase the needy with a pair of sandals. That makes 6. And then the 7th one here is to, is that, and that we may sell the refuse of grain. So this gives, Amos 7 bases for Israel's judgment in this unit here. So I thought that was very important to see. You can see here how I've outlined the text here, but it's important here that we would look here. He goes on to Amos here in point 2. It's a quotation of their thoughts, and the purpose of it is for economic oppression of the poor. Okay, and then so we have these, and they come in the form of rhetorical questions. Their thoughts are their own questions. It's when will the new moon pass, that we may sell grain, and the Sabbath, that we may open we could just supply the treasuries of grain, the grain, we may open the granaries. That may be permissible to translate it that way. So they're observing the new moon as a religious festival, as well as something very separate. Remember, the new moon is something that comes with its own. The trumpets are blown, over the month, and there are special sacrifices just for the new moon, and it is a day of cessation, and it's separated here from the Sabbath. So these people that are involved in economic oppression are also observing, the religious, festivals of the nation, and you can just say it's all done. It's nothing here has any internal value for them. It's just they're cooperating with society at this point, but it means nothing to them. The Sabbath means nothing. The new moon means nothing. And you'll notice that the new moon is mentioned in Colossians. So and this time says, don't let anyone judge you concerning food or drink, new moon or Sabbaths. It mentions that in Colossians 2:16. It says, these are just shadows of what is to come. Christ is the substance. So, and we can see that, in the millennial reign, we will be observing the new moon and the Sabbaths. That will be occurring. But in the present time, it says, "Let no one judge you concerning these things." So I just, whether, you're gonna, just there's a whole interpretation here of being Sabbatarian or whatever. I just, you don't judge me, I don't judge you. And if we leave it at that, just like Colossians says, then, we're fine. But we do know that in the millennium, that it's, is for right now, they're just shadows. They're shadows of things to come. And we can see from, you read in Ezekiel and Isaiah that these are, the new moon is going to be observed going forward. So that is important for you, no matter what your, theological, persuasion is of how we, you look at these matters. The important point is to understand that the whole reading of the text, and that they are still going to have and hold validity for the future. But at this time, they're waiting. They can't wait till the Sabbath is over or the new moon observance is over, so they can commit economic crimes here, making small the ephah and making great the shekel, that the weight. So they get more. They get a bigger piece of the prize here of money, of shekel, and possibly here this ule avet here to pervert the an arm of the scale of deceit here. So that is what most commentators are going to say here. So I he's making an infinitive out of this. So I'm going to go along with it. So somehow the balance scale. So one arm of it is bent in such a way because this particular verb here, avat here, means to bend. When it talks about iniquity means something that is bent. Reality is bent. And so when you see iniquity in the Bible, this is primarily, this particular verb is, the noun it means bent. And it's, so this here is to, we say pervert, or to bend the scales of deceit, literally. So this here is, something to see. And remember that, they're observing Sabbath and a new moon, but they're wanting to cheat here in their business practices, so that in their measures here of a dry measure here of an ephah, or in the scale of weights here with the shekel, they trying to they change these, and so this is specifically mentioned in the Pentateuch, that you're not supposed to pervert the scales of justice, and you're supposed to have it just scales and a just ephah, and so all that's mentioned. It's very important, but obviously they are the ones who here are being depicted for these these 7 crimes that they're committing, and so they're all listed here, and look at lastly that this last tristic here, to acquire the poor with silver. This is by cheating in all these ways, they're gonna be able then to amass more wealth, so as to if I keep doing this, I can get slaves for basically for free, and then selling needies for a pair of shoes. It's like humanity is worthless. And then lastly, look at this. They're trying to sell the the refuse of the wheat from the threshing floor, to put in chaff in with it and sell it as part of the grain prices. And so this is just these are very unscrupulous people. And so these are reasons here for judgment and exile. Okay, then coming here then to this slide, it's important to follow this structural analysis here, because this text really breaks down into these units. Next we come to Amos's. He lists 7 "I will" statements of Yahweh's judgments upon Israel. And in this particular unit here, we will see the first of the 7 here. I will never forget their deeds. That's number 1 here on the list. But this unit really nicely divides down into into 3 parts here. We have Amos's report of Yahweh's oath, and then we have Yahweh's 2 rhetorical questions, and then we have this metaphorical application of the Nile to the earth quaking, and this is just just really nicely, the thoughts are very well delineated. It's important to see, once you start doing structural analysis, you're going to appreciate the value of of the inspiration of Scripture, and that there's rhyme and reason to what is being narrated. Yahweh's just not the canon of the Bible is just not random words just thrown on a page. So that's why it says, "Study to show yourself approved." So we come here to verse 7, this oath. Yahweh has sworn by the pride of Jacob. And so probably the best way, to, instead of getting, knee deep into all this stuff here, the pride of Jacob is, Yahweh is himself is the pride of Jacob. So he's swearing here by Israel's own pride. It's their pride that Yahweh is their God. That is the way we should probably understand this particular phrase, because it was used differently in the last chapter. And then so what is this oath? The oath here is im eshkach la netzach kol ma'asehem. I shall never ever forget their deeds. So those 7 deeds that we just listed there in the prior unit, Yahweh's not going to forget their deeds. Now, it's not just referring to that. I mean, we're talking now about the history, starting with Jeroboam the first all the way down to Jeroboam the second, and ultimately to Hoshea. So at 722. So Yahweh's not going to forget their deeds. And then he has, so that's very separate then from what we have in 8. So we have these rhetorical questions. Now concerning this, shall not the earth quake? And all of the inhabitants in it mourn. And then it says, all of it goes up, and we're just going to say, as the Nile, and is tossed about, and it sinks as the Nile of Egypt. So this last phrase, this last distick here, all of it goes up as the Nile and is tossed about and sinks as the Nile of Egypt. This is talking about shall not the earth quake. So it's using the metaphor of the Nile, because remember the Nile is inundated, every year by the equatorial rains that fall in, whether it's in the Blue Nile, branch that's in Ethiopia, or the White Nile branch that goes back to Lake Victoria and further beyond, because Lake Victoria itself is fed by streams. And remember, the Nile River begins, at the equator, and so since so during the summer months, they're going to get a lot of monsoon weather, and so that all of that rain is going to come down the 400,000-mile length of the Nile from the equator, and it's going to flow downhill from the equator, because remember, all rivers flow downhill, and it comes all the way down to the Mediterranean Sea. Okay, just for your own memory, you go back and look at my stuff on Genesis, on the creation week. I worked on this underneath on the third video underneath the topic on the firmament. But anyhow, the rise and fall of the Nile. So since it gets all these equatorial rains, then it floods, and so the Nile River floods, and then by the time of March and May, the river is at its lowest point. So it's talking about the rise and fall, and then likewise, this is a metaphor for an earthquake, and you can remember, you go back to to the superscription that Amos's prophetic oracles occurred 2 years before the earthquake that happened underneath Uzziah. That was even memorialized in the book of Zechariah. These are important. These are all important points here. So these rhetorical questions, shall not the earth quake, and the inhabitants in it mourn? And remember here, I have that down here, Leviticus. The earth, hi honey, is becomes unclean, and Yahweh says, "I will visit its iniquity upon it, and the earth will vomit out her inhabitants." And so this vomiting out of the earth's inhabitants is this Leviticus scripture is somewhat echoes what we're hearing here, that the land is quaking. So the land quakes from the sins that were committed upon it, and its inhabitants do mourn. Okay, so we're continuing on within this this unit here of these, Amos lists these 7, judgments of Yahweh. And we remember the first one in the last one was, I will not forget their deeds. And then just to mark these off here before we get into the text, I will bring the sun in at noonday, and I will darken the land in the day of light, and I will turn, your feast into mourning, and I will, bring up upon all loins sackcloth, and I will make it as a mourning of an only child, and I will send a famine in the land. So there you go. There's all of these, 1, and we've got 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So there's the 7 judgments to equal out the 7 evil deeds, the bases for Yahweh's judgment that was delineated, prior to this. So it's important that that we do count. We look at the text, look at it, because it will tell us things that if we don't scrutinize it, we can pass over some things. Now, this text here also has some other, repeating phrases. V'haya b'yom hahu ne'um Adonai Elohim. And then you'll see it repeated again here in 11. Hine yamim ba'im ne'um Adonai Elohim. And then we have down here, Bayom Hahu here, in that day. So we have these, what we typically call these chronological notations or eschatological quotations. And it's definitely about the end. Remember, the end has come here, and eschatology, eschatos, it means end. So the end here is relative to their date of non-existence. We'll say that when the judgment comes. Ultimately, that was 722, as we know. But this text, basically, we have 2 oracles of judgment with 3 eschatological notations of doom. And the first oracle here, is Yahweh was turning the sun to darkness. And a lot of people would, bring up the eclipse that occurred in, what was it, June 15th of 763. That's how we've made our relative chronology for the Old Testament period was based specifically off of the Limu list, or the eponym list of the Assyrian eponym list, and that it was during the reign of Ashur-dan III, that it was in the year when Bursagala was, this governor over Guzan, and it makes Guzana. It says that there was this revolt in Libya Ali, and that there was an eclipse of the sun, and so when scholars went back to look at this, they correlated that this eclipse occurred on June 15th, 763. So this that eclipse, that was a full eclipse in Assyria, in Israel, would have been partial. It might have been part of the cause. It may have been that may have foreshadowed this prophetic oracle of Yahweh here, that metaphorically speaking, in 722, when it all went down, basically, the sun went set at noon. For them, it was over. Lights were out, and that he was going to, bring this darkness on the land during the daylight time. And so there's all these reversals here that Yahweh's going to do. He's turning their feasts to mourning, and all, of their songs to lamentation. So all the exuberance and the joyful singing, is all brought to mourning. Why? Because because of their deeds. You can sit and praise God all you want, but if you don't walk straight, it doesn't mean anything. It just means that you're a hypocrite. And then Yahweh said He was going to bring sackcloth upon them, and their heads were going to be bald. And then in this last oracle here, behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, and I'm going to send a famine on the land, not a famine for bread, and not for thirst of water, but to hear the words of Yahweh. Okay, and that people were going to be, going to go searching high and low, to and fro, north to the east, and going to fro to, inquire of a word of Yahweh, and they're not going to find it. So obviously these people are looking for they're inquiring to find out, can we find somebody to tell us that God's going to save us from, because they can tell that everything's going to go bad, and that Yahweh's not going to. He's already given His word. His word was repent. They didn't listen, and all the good words from the false prophets, peace, peace, when there is no peace, like Jeremiah says, it's not going to be there. You're not going to find anything. And as a consequence, of this dearth over, the lack of the word of God, that the virgins, they're going to faint. beautiful virgins and the young men with thirst, and those who swear by the guilt of Samaria and say, as your God lives, O Dan, and as the way of Beersheba lives, and it says they will fall and not rise any longer, no more to rise, and they're going to fall, and that's so this second oracle here that begins in verse 11, talks here specifically about this famine that's going to come upon the land for the word of Yahweh. And it's not going to be found. They're going to be searching from north to east, scurrying all about, and they're just not going to, there is going to be no word of Yahweh that they're going to want to hear. It's already been said, and they've rejected it. And notice here this, we have this, those who swear by the guilt of Samaria. So that's going to include, those people are going to have to include the young virgins and the young men, and basically the way it all filters out, it's the whole, population of Israel. But they can't. The young men and women can't be excluded from this. And the guilt of Samaria. Remember that Jeroboam set up the calves in Dan and in Dan and Bethel, and then we have here that we have this, by the way of, as the way of Beersheba lives. So this is, a name or some type of appellation that appears in the land of Judah, that the Israelites were going down to Beersheba to an alternate, false worship site. So there was syncretistic worship already in Israel and Judah at this time. And it's referred to not only here, but also, back in, I think it was 5:5, do not, it says here, inquire of Bethel, and do not go to Gilgal, and Beersheba do not pass over. For Gilgal shall certainly go into captivity, and Bethel shall become nothing. So that's something here. And then we have the Septuagint's, translation here. Those who swear according to the, propitiation of Samaria, or the place of forgiveness in Samaria. And those who say, your God lives, O Dan, and your God lives, O, Beersheba. So you can, and it says, and they shall fall and rise no longer. So you can see here that the Septuagint tried to somehow do something with this as the way of, Beersheba lives. They just, that sounded too foreign to them, and rightfully so. So they just stylized it after, as your gods live, O Dan. They put that on here for here, but it definitely, that's just trying to make a better reading, I would surmise. But these are idolaters, and so it's the fall of the virgins and young men and idolaters. The famine for the word of God. They're not going to find it. There's no word for, an idolater. The only word for an idolater is repent. Okay, this is another session of Biblical Theology, Exegesis, and Hermeneutics, where meaning is always context-driven. Please like, share, and subscribe.